Welcome to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI, a podcast from Paul Weiss featuring your host, Katherine Forrest. The only update you need on AI policy, law, and governance starts now.
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, or good evening. I have no idea what time of day you are listening to this episode, so I don't want to suggest that my intake of caffeine bears any relationship to what our audience may be imbibing at this time. But welcome to Paul Weiss's Waking Up with AI. I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello. Katherine, episode 100 is behind us. How are we feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling like we got a little cadence going here, Scott.
I think that's right. We're getting there.
Yeah. And so we've covered so much that I will tell our audience that it's really worth looking back at some of the prior episodes, and there's a couple of real sort of nuggets in there. I want to just remind our audience that we've got one on why it's so important. Episode number 1 actually was why it's so important for a company to have a common definition of AI. We've got a number of different episodes that talk about what kinds of things you might want as an in-house lawyer to make sure your board understands. We've talked about, vendor agreements and AI. We've talked about all kinds of new model releases and a lot of new research. And so I encourage people to go back and to look over the prior episodes and maybe pick out a few that might be of interest to them that they may not have gotten before. And if anybody has listened to all 100, I want to send you some swag. We have got swag for the person or persons who come forward and say that they are, true listeners to all 100 episodes.
And do they have to prove it? Do they have to, show their Spotify queue, everything completed? Or can we take people's words for it?
No, I'll take their word for it. Like, I believe in the honest person who's just going to say, I've subjected themselves to 100 episodes. Like, who wants to be in that crowd? I hope there's somebody, I really like this. But, we've got a couple of towels left over with Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI, right?
Yeah, those are great.
The towels, we've got a couple of Marmo and Patagonia jackets. We've got some mugs. So anyway, turning to today's episode, we're going to be talking now about some developments in China.
Right. So we have mentioned the AI action plan and the White House's focus on competition in the AI race with China. But we're going to sort of go to the flip side of that, which is actually diving into how China is itself approaching AI.
Right. And actually, China approaching AGI and the race for AGI. So we're not going to cover all of this in a single episode, but there really is an interesting report. We like reports that we're going to encourage our readers to use. I tend to print them out, which is why I hold them up in front of the camera that nobody but you and I can see. And so the one that I'm holding up right now was released in December of 2025 by Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology, or CSET. Again, that's Georgetown's Center for Security and Emerging Technology with the acronym CSET. And the report is called China's Embodied AI, a path to AGI. And it's really got a lot of information here that is very interesting about where China is, the history of how it gets there. And as you know, Scott, I've had a particular interest in embodied AI.
Yep, and I am excited for this one too, Katherine, because I have been following CSET and their China analysis for a while now, and I think we'll get into an earlier report from them. I think that came out last May that's on the topic, and there's just so much ground to cover here. So if it's good with you, I will just go ahead and set the stage, but we'll be coming back repeatedly to the view that some hold that embodied AI, which is AI in the physical world, and AGI are interconnected. And the CSET report indicates that this proposition has serious buy-in from the Chinese state. And as a result, that's influencing the dynamics in the race to AGI.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to do two things. One, I want to mention the name of the report that you had just referenced, which was the May 2025 CSET report, also from the same Georgetown Center for Security and Emerging Technology. And it's called Wuhan's AI Development, China's Alternative Springboard to artificial general intelligence. And that's, again, May 2025. So I want to sort of make sure we have that. And then I want to do something else, which is talk a little bit about the connection between embodiment and AGI. Because, I'm a big fan of this. And we've talked about Jan LeCun on a prior episode and world models. And there's a relationship here. So there is a theory within the AI research community that artificial general intelligence will take some form of embodiment to actually be fully realized. Why? Because AI otherwise is learning through words, through pictures, through different kinds of multimodal data, but it's not learning necessarily the laws of physics as humans do through moving in the world. And so there's a concept that embodied AI, which would be, let's just say, all kinds of robotics. And there are lots and lots of different kinds of robotics. It's not just humanoid robotics or quadruped robotics, and we did an episode on robotics, but it's lots of different devices that move and experience the world in a real way. And the concept is that if you've got embodied AI that pushes over a vase, which I call a vase and I don't call it a vase, I just never have, okay? I just want to say that. And it pushes over a vase and realizes that the vase, if it's made out of a breakable material like ceramic or glass, is going to break, that is a then learned moment. So rather than just hearing or reading or watching it on a movie that something breaks, sort of actually experiencing the physics of it is a different kind of experience that then gets brought into the information repository of whatever robotic embodiment that is, and into the AI that is within that robotic embodiment. And there is a different kind of learned behavior. So we know that China is very interested in embodiment, and there has been, a fair amount of speculation about what they're doing about it.
Right. And so then turning back to that first CSET report that we mentioned, it explains that compared to the US's very LLM-centric approach to AGI, China has made a broader bet, and that includes but isn't limited to embodied AI. But the report is looking at embodied AI and looking at statements from researchers in China, along with measures and initiatives that are being taken at the national and local government levels to show just how widely shared that view is that embodied AI is a key potential path to explore on the road to AGI. So I think I do just want to sort of draw that out a bit more, which is just that it's still one of a number of bets that China is placing on AGI, but it's an important one that they're taking seriously.
Yeah, and it's one that actually, some others, as we'd mentioned before, like Jan LeCun and some others, are actually also thinking that there needs to be a kind of a way in which a world model gets embedded into AI in order for it to fully experience through a world model AGI. Now, one thing I do want to say as a little aside is that there are very, very likely many different ways to actually reach AGI. And when you reach AGI, there's going to be a spectrum of where you are on that sort of road of AGI. The road could be a very long road, and you could be at the first point on that road where you could hit AGI and not be deeply into AGI. You might not be as far along as another AI model. So not all AI models may reach AGI at the same time, and they may not all reach it in the same way. So it's possible that you don't need embodiment for AGI. That's one of the bets that many of the high capability LLM developers are making, although some of them also have various kinds of embodiments. We know that there are world models which now are emergent capabilities within even LLMs. So I don't want to suggest through this discussion today that embodiment has to be the way to get to AGI. So let's talk about the way in which the LLMs do it now.
Sure. So I can dive into that a little bit quickly, Catherine, which is just that language for LLMs is a depiction of the world and it's a representation. And the idea that you scale it up and you increase the reasoning, the abstraction is going to help you get to AGI. And then for embodied AI, on the other hand, the idea is that human intelligence is a product of interaction between the brain, the body, and the environment. And the physical element is a key component of our intelligence. And so the idea is that it's therefore going to be a part of achieving artificial general intelligence that approximates our abilities. But so like you mentioned, Katherine, though, it's not like LLMs, have no role, that LLMs and world models need to be integrated into a physical component to get to AGI. But again, that is just one school of thought.
Yeah, it's a philosophical debate. And one of the things that I say in my forthcoming book on superintelligence,
There we go,
called Of Another Mind, soon to be out for pre-order. One of the things that I say is that, we humans in different parts of the world and on our Earth learn an awful lot about the way the world works in terms of physics and in terms of, for instance, the way that, gravity plays with waves to make the waves in our ocean and the waves in the air, that there are lots of things that we can learn about that we can't see even. And so that's one of the reasons why I personally think that embodiment is not necessarily the be-all and the end-all. But in any event, moving back to the concept that CSET is talking about, because it's very, very important. So the CSET report tracks initiatives from various levels of the government of China. What's clear is that China is taking this incredibly seriously. It's taking embodiment and the relationship of embodiment to AGI very seriously. And one example in the CSET report is at the municipal level, there's a 3-year plan from a Beijing administrative body to facilitate, this particular technology's development, but also that the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party has identified embodied AI as a target for accelerated development. So there's a lot of money, a lot of research going into this.
Right, and that target was set at the 4th plenum in October, which was focused on drafting the country's 15th 5-year plan. So as CSET notes, inclusion of embodied AI really signals its importance in central leadership planning in China.
Right, and there are many others too, which we don't have time to get into, but the report identifies the numerous research and innovation centers around China that are working on embodied AI, and particularly forms of embodiment that would fall under what we would call the rubric of robotics. And it highlights how in higher education in China, embodiment has been embraced as part of AI technical development. And there are 8 now top universities that have announced plans to offer a major in that.
That gives me an idea for another episode, Katherine, which is discussing about how AI is being folded in more broadly to higher education in the United States, because I really have no idea if there are similar programs in the United States that are focused, on subsectors of the technology.
I am going to write that down.
Great. So then going back to the report, it underscores the breadth of the country's approach from industry to research to education to those government planning and initiatives. But I think with that, we can segue into the other CSET report that we had mentioned, which again is titled Wuhan's AI Development, China's Alternative Springboard to Artificial General Intelligence. And again, that's from May 2025. But that describes a project taking place in Wuhan to roll out what's called a large-scale social simulator and infuse AI throughout the city. And that's being done by bringing together the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Automation, Huawei, the technology company, and Peking University. And so according to CSET's report, that social simulator will, quote, simulate multi-scale physical world and social complex systems, end quote, on the path to becoming the operating model of a coexisting smart society and a tool for social governance.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have to sort of wonder what all that means and how it's been going. So while that initiative doesn't seem to be about embodiment in a robotic sense, it is about infusing AI into a real environment throughout a city and learning based upon interaction how AI learns from that environment and how humans actually may interact and learn from the AI. So it's really, if we can get more information on it as it's gone through some sort of evolution and a timeline over there, it'll be very interesting to look at.
Right. And so there is an AGI angle here. And so I don't want to miss that. But the idea is that the rollout of this type of system, which is taking data from all over the city, will give AI opportunities to become more intelligent and thereby promote its evolution into AGI. The data that the platform is getting from the city is, real data that's grounded in the physical world. And so the idea being that that contrasts with the language data that we were talking about, that's a depiction of the physical world. And so this also just highlights what we were saying earlier, that the country is really diversifying its bets in pursuit of AGI.
Yeah, and one thing that's worth touching on, which is really sort of an aside but important, is that there have been reports at the end of 2025 in major U.S. established news outlets that China has constructed the biggest power grid ever seen, generating twice as much electricity as the United States, at least in a certain area. And so this means, for instance, that China data centers could be supplied in different ways, and their, of course, cost structure is always different from what we have in the United States.
Yeah, and they are anticipated to spend more than $500 billion on their grid over the next 5 years. And then in 2028, China is expected to operationalize a nationally interconnected grid of data centers, which is, referred to as a national cloud.
Yeah, this is what OpenAI in the past has called an electron advantage, that computing is simply cheaper and more widely available in China compared to the US because our power grid is aging. And there's been actually a lot of media coverage of that, in the recent last couple of weeks.
And so, Katherine, since you like how I summed it up so much last time, I'm going to go for it again.
Yeah, sum it up again. Take us home, Scott.
So China's placing bets on different approaches to AGI, including embodiment and this large-scale deployment of AI throughout society. And just as in the United States, the infrastructure is an essential part of the story, too. And China's build-out of its power grid and data centers are a key piece of that puzzle.
Data centers and power grids, energy, water, the resources, the rare earth minerals, these are all essential components that sometimes we lose sight of, but they are the core of the whole thing. So that's all we've got time for today. I'm Katherine Forrest.
And I'm Scott Caravello. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Thanks for listening to Paul Weiss Waking Up with AI. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app to stay up to date on the latest in AI policy, law, and governance. For more information on Paul Weiss, go to our website at www.paulweiss.com.